The best entrepreneurship is born out of necessity, out of
Mm.
people saying, you know what, unemployment benefits only last so long and they don't really pay that much anyway. And I need to figure something out. And when you have your back against a wall, it helps sharpen the mind. And I mean, obviously, this is not a wonderful situation for anyone to be in. It is incredibly traumatic to be in a place where you have lost your job or somehow your hours or your income has been reduced and you're in a kind of unexpectedly dire situation. It's one I can empathize with because right around 9/11, I was laid off from my very first job with no warning. They gave me 4 days of severance pay, and I had to figure out how to make how to make my rent.
Dorie, it is so good to see you. Welcome to the show. It is awesome to have you here.
I am so glad to have the chance to catch up with you, Mike. Thank you.
Well, you know the deal. I told you that way back when I was working in corporate and I wanted to become my own boss, Reinventing You was the book that really kind of set me on that path. It's kind of crazy. Now we're here full circle, like 7 years later.
I am
It's,
honored, my man. That's
yeah,
very cool.
I remember I was walking through a Barnes and Noble in Piscataway, New Jersey, because I used to live in the New York area, right? And I was like, how do I reinvent my life? And then reinventing you. So, and now you come out with entrepreneurial you, which is awesome. We've seen this space kind of change. And so, as someone who has worked in corporate, you've served that market, you teach in business. What are you seeing happening maybe over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years in the workplace for the everyday employee, like the workforce? What are you seeing there happening?
Well, I think one of the biggest things that's happened is in the last few months of the pandemic, what we have seen across the board is that changes that in many ways were already underway, but probably under normal circumstances would have taken a long time to play out, would have taken a long time to socialize within corporations and overcome inherent resistance. That just sort of resistance vanished overnight out of necessity. And so, whether it's work from home arrangements, whether it is new attitudes about time shifting or about different ways of operating in team practices and things like that, it just blew the old ways of working out of the water in a span of 2 weeks. And I think in many ways, there's going to be a sort of add-on effect to that, which is that people have suddenly realized that we had preconceptions in the back of our own minds that, oh, change is so hard, change takes such a long time, oh, this is going to take years. And meanwhile we realize, oh, if people are actually motivated, things kind of can happen overnight. And I think that has unlocked a couple of things. One is the realization that we have a lot more control about making things the way that we want. And just if we have a vision that it really can be operationalized. And I think the other thing that it has shown us is that is if we needed more reinforcement, but I think this was kind of the ultimate reinforcement. The plans that we have, the visions that we have in place based on what the past showed us are not necessarily reliable. Things can be blown up overnight, and we need to be agile, and we need to realize that we can't really count on predictions. We have to be ready and able to move and to pivot. And I think that understanding that change is possible and that we need to be proactive in shaping it is really quite powerful for individuals to realize. It helps us come into our own power in terms of our professional lives.
Do you see more people becoming solo entrepreneurs, contractors, consultants? Do you see that like that has awakened a big segment of like corporate America? Is that just like kind of, I hate this phrase, but is that going to be like kind of a new normal, you think?
Well, certainly we have seen vast swaths of the economy where for months, people did not have a paycheck. I mean, slowly some things
Mm.
are starting to come back online, but you take the initial industries that were hit hardest, and are probably going to be the last ones to come back, whether it's entertainment or travel or hospitality or things like that. And the best entrepreneurship is born out of necessity, out of people
Mm.
saying, you know what, unemployment benefits only last so long and they don't really pay that much anyway. And I need to figure something out. And when you have your back against a wall, it helps sharpen the mind. And I mean, obviously, this is not a wonderful situation for anyone to be in. It is incredibly traumatic to be in a place where you have lost your job, or somehow your hours or your income has been reduced, and you're in a kind of unexpectedly dire situation. It's one I can empathize with, because right around 9/11, I was laid off from my very first job with no warning. They gave me 4 days of severance pay, and I had to figure out how to make my rent. Uh, but I do think that level of keenness that is required to survive, where you say, all right, well, what do I have? What assets do I have? And how can I leverage them? Often the silver lining of it is that it enables us to tap into creativity that otherwise we would not have known existed in us.
Is that what kind of set you down the path of like starting your own business, or did that put a bug in your ear like early on when you got let go from that position?
The layoff showed me a few things. The
Mm.
first one is it definitely seared into me the understanding that a quote unquote safe job or a day job is very fragile. And whatever we're promised implicitly or explicitly, that can vanish pretty rapidly when circumstances change. And I didn't go into entrepreneurship straight away.
Mm.
There were some detours where I was working in politics. I ran a nonprofit for a couple of years, but it definitely made me appreciate the idea of, okay, I need to be the captain of my career here. I am not going to just assume that everything is going to work out. I need to be building my skills. I need to be building my network so that I have options if things go south. That was the first thing. But I will say that actually something that was very powerful for me in the aftermath of losing my reporting job is that for about 6 months prior to getting hired on for my next job, I was a freelance reporter. And that was some of the best training that I ever had in my life, because a lot of what I do now, even, I mean, this is not this is not really a source of money. I mean, I get like a tiny bit of money sometimes for writing articles, but mostly I get zero. But learning to write articles and create content very rapidly, and
Mm.
to understand what makes for an interesting story, is a very valuable skill, because it has become, this content creation has become the cornerstone of the marketing that I do for the rest of my work in terms of coaching or speaking or consulting for executives.
Yeah, so there's like a shift that happened for me too, where it was like, okay, I can freelance. I had a good job. And my story was I didn't get let go from the job. I wanted to let the job go.
Yeah,
I
what
was like,
was it you were doing, Mike?
I was the CMO of an educational company just outside of Manhattan, over the bridge in New Jersey, and we were doing really well. But on that job, it was a private company, so I was the CMO of the company, but I was doing a lot of the marketing, like the hands-on marketing. So, like you, I learned how to write, and I joke with people. They ask me like, "How'd you learn how to write copy? How'd you learn how to do marketing speak and so on and so forth?" I'm like, "Here's what you do: you go work for a business who have people who don't speak English." And you don't speak the language either. You take what they say and somehow, work your magic and speak to a market that is very affluent and educated, and try to convince them to buy the services. I mean, it was basically a high-end tutoring service, kind of like a Princeton Review, Kaplan type of
Right.
thing. And the owners were Korean. I don't speak Korean. I'm Korean, but I don't speak Korean. And so they're talking to me in broken English, and I have to take that and sell it to really educated, affluent, successful people who could afford their services for their kids,
Wow.
so
Yep.
that they could get into college. And that's where I learned that, like you, the writing what was interesting to me though, and I always think about this now that I've been an entrepreneur for a number of years, if that couple, that lady who doesn't speak English could do this and put on the hat every day and get after it, like certainly I can. And that was a real shift for me entrepreneurially. How about for you? Like you hustle, you do the freelance stuff. You've got to chase down your own leads. You got to get your own contracts. You run a nonprofit. Was there a moment or a season for you where you're like, oh, I'm an entrepreneur now?
Well, the way it came about for me was I was into, yeah, I mean, really, I think my entrepreneurial career started, even though I didn't think of it this way, when I was a freelance journalist,
Yeah.
because it was the ultimate training in, you eat what you kill. I was not getting paid unless I could convince an editor that yes, this is an interesting story, and we will commission you to do it. So it was very, very high stakes, and I think that when it comes to how to learn effectively, all the research, all the studies says that the key is having rapid, kind of immediate feedback in the moment about what works. And there's really no more immediate feedback than you send over a pitch and the editor is like yes or no. So I learned to hone that, but I didn't conceptually think of myself as an entrepreneur until later. It was a few years down the road, and I was running this small nonprofit. And about a year into it, I realized, it was tiny. Literally, we were three staffers. I was the boss, and so I had to have my hands in almost everything. And up till that time, I had had jobs where I was specialized in marketing or communications, but I had never done everything. I mean, this was everything from getting the business cards made, to updating the website, to filing the workers' comp reports, to managing the FileMaker Pro database, all these ridiculous things. And I realized, oh my gosh, I'm having to be such a utility infielder here that really it's like running my own business. And like a minute after that thought, I'm like, wait, I could run my own business. And there was
Ding.
so much stress about running this nonprofit. I mean, technically, quote unquote, it paid my salary, but I had to raise my entire salary and the salary of these staffers. And I was just, constantly kept awake at night wondering how we were going to raise enough money. It was just so, you might think like, oh, it's just a little nonprofit. How stressful could it be? It was the most stressful job of my entire life, because it really felt like the whole burden was on me. The board was not really a fundraising board. So I had a lot of weight on it. So I actually, I'm one of the few people that I felt like starting my own business was actually a lower risk proposition, because I was making so little money and I had so much stress. I'm like, you know what? Like, for sure I could make more money than this. Like, I don't even know what I'd be doing. Like, I could probably make more money than this, like donating blood. So I'm going to do it.
It's amazing. I heard a friend say this about we trade entrepreneurial war stories. When you're starting out, and he goes he used more colorful language, so I'm going to dumb it down here for all of you who listening who might have kids while you're in the car. But he said the wise entrepreneur does crap that he or she hates once, and then doesn't do it again, because then you know enough to be dangerous. You know enough about it doesn't take you 10 billable hours to go get business cards, like and you hire a freelancer to do it or something like that. My journey, it's so similar. You've talked several times about stories, interesting stories. Stories are all they're the big buzz right now, and I'm like, wake up, people! We've been reading stories for years. But to you, when you would look back during your days as a freelancer, and even now as you're pitching, you're continuing to create content. I see it all the time, and you've got the new book out, which we'll talk about in a second. But if you could say like, hey guys, this is what makes an interesting story, how would you explain that to somebody who's listening right now? They're in corporate, they might have their own business. Honestly, in that space, you don't really learn storytelling, and
No,
it's
for
a
sure.
huge thing. So what makes it for an interesting story? the way you see it?
Well, let me start with what's the opposite of an interesting
Okay.
story,
Yeah.
right? I think the problem, I mean, everybody likes a good story, right? I mean, that's why in our spare time we, go see movies, or we, read a fun novel or something like that. There is something inherently appealing about it. But the problem in the corporate world is that so often we learn corporate communication not through any kind of training per se, but by watching what other people are doing. And it turns into a bad game of telephone because they don't know what they're doing either, but we don't know that. We're like, well, they've been there for 20 years, so I guess he knows what he's doing. No, he does not. And so you're copying these like bad replicas, and they're terrible and they're boring, and the slides have, each PowerPoint slide has 700 words on it. And, I mean, it's like, oh, let's put an Excel chart on the PowerPoint and put that on the screen. I mean, it's a nightmare. So I think that a lot of it is that we feel like in order to be taken seriously, we need to adhere to the norms that other people are setting. But I mean, this is like a lot of life, right? Because we're looking to other people who don't know what we're doing, it leads to bad outcomes. So I think that we have to go back to first principles and say, not what is everybody else doing, but instead, what is interesting? What would be interesting to you? And if we can do that, I mean, I try to do this with my books. As I was writing Entrepreneurial You, I really was consciously striving to write a book that if I read it, as a third party who had not in fact written it, if I read it, would I think it was interesting? Would I think it was cool? And I tried to aim for that. So ultimately, I think, the idea is we often feel a need to make things abstract, to sort of start with, well, here's the definition and here's the problem statement. And it's, there's kind of a mantra that I like to use, which is Anglo-Saxon, not Latinate. And what I mean by that, I mean, they talk about this in writing programs. If you're using the kind of Latinate words, the fancier words, the more highbrow words, I mean, I'm a big fan of great vocabulary. I love that. But I think in academia and in business, there's a push that it has to be these things that are complicated and at an emotional reserve. Whereas the more typical Anglo-Saxon words, and I mean Anglo-Saxon, like as in this, the old Viking dudes, these are the words that are visceral. It's like blood, kill. Like those are Anglo-Saxon kind of words. How do we go back to the core of what's exciting and interesting for people? So, I want to try to tell stories that are engaging for other people. I think we can learn so much more by finding some kind of an example, reeling people in and telling them that story so that they can feel it first. And then you can do an exegesis of what that story means and what we can learn from that. And if we do that, it stands a lot better chance of actually sinking in with people.
I think conflict and tension, like you're saying, those Anglo-Saxon words, like that's what makes a story interesting. I mean, like how many of us would sit around and watch grass grow? It's not fun. I spend a lot of time watching those YouTube videos on nature channels.
Oh
And
yeah.
there's this great Instagram account, if you can handle the gore, called Nature is Metal. Okay. And it shows all the stuff they would never show on National Geographic.
Oh
Right? Like
man.
the actual like zebra getting eaten up right by the line, right?
That is hardcore.
Yeah. So for me, it's like the one Viking Instagram account that I find follow. But and it's sometimes I'm just like, oh, dude, I cannot take this today. But it's so funny you mention what's interesting in the blood and all that stuff. It made me think of that because the guy whoever runs that account, or even National Geographic with tamer video footage, they make up these stories. They do these voiceovers with that dude who has a real sleepy voice, and the ant crawls down, and then they make a whole story out of it. And it's all conflict. It's all risk. It's all danger. We've all been in situations like that. We don't like to go through it ourselves, but we like to watch other people go through it.
Absolutely. And I mean,
Right?
if you think even about something like sports coverage, sports on television, was not so much. I mean, yes, it's all, it's interesting to watch sports for people that are sports fans, but the real innovation in sports coverage on television came in it was like the late 60s or the early 70s, maybe, when the TV show The Wide World of Sports came on. And the whole premise of that was that they would tell the backstories of the athletes, and they would tell the backstories of the training and the sort of trials and tribulations along the way. They would tell stories sometimes about the sports, because if somebody is not a fan of a particular sport, I mean, I don't know, what do I know about slalom skiing, but if you talk about it and you give people enough context so they care, all of a sudden it makes so much more of a difference as compared to just, okay, there's some people doing a thing on TV. It looks like they're going fast. Okay, that's nice. Who are they? you need
That's
you need to
right.
get people invested.
That is so funny because I was an '80s kid. I was born in the late '70s, but I was an '80s kid. I remember that. I have not thought of Wide World of Sports in like decades, but I still remember their slogan: "The thrill of victory and the agony of defeat." And I remember they showed a guy skiing down the hill and tumbling over. That is so good. Wow. Okay. Yeah, I love that. It makes me think of how people watch the Olympics every 4 years, and these
Even non-sport
characters,
fans.
yeah,
That's right.
and these characters pop up. Like I can remember the U.S. gymnasts my sister and I would watch in the 80s and the 90s. I didn't give a rip about who they were before, and I didn't care after. I just cared for that like 6 week period. Oh, Carrie Strug is from, and I remember she like broke her ankle or something. And like I was like, and I fell in love with her, and I was like, oh my gosh, And it's these stories. So interesting. That is brilliant. So, tell me a little bit about entrepreneurial you. I'm super curious about where that desire came from, because there's so many authors out there. There are a lot of books, and you covered a lot of bloggers and people who are making a living in that. What did you find as you were doing the research in that market that really jumped out, that maybe had surprised you?
Yeah,
There
well,
was
I
anything?
went into writing the book, Mike, with a very specific aim for myself, which is my previous book, Standout, had really been about how to build your brand and positioning as a thought leader in your company or in your marketplace. And I think that is a really important and valuable quest. But there's kind of a next step that comes after that, which is, okay, wonderful. People think you're great. People think you're smart. How do you make money at that? And I wanted to answer that question. So for me, what the goal of Entrepreneurial You was, and again, I'm the avatar, right? I wanted to learn, and I figured other people would want to learn as well. I reached out to about 50 of my friends and colleagues that I knew who were earning money, sometimes significant sums of money, in a variety of different ways. And I wanted to interview people who were exemplars of best practices, so that I could basically have an excuse. We all know. I mean, I hope we know by now that it is a pretty ridiculous thing to do, to ping someone and be like, "Can I pick your brain?" It's like the most infamous question now. It's like,
Oh,
dear God, help us. No,
mm-hmm.
nobody wants to have their brain picked by anybody. But what I wanted to do was have an excuse to interview people who were at the top of their game about what they were doing and why and how, so that I could learn from them and share that information. So basically, the entire book is a series of stories and profiles of very successful entrepreneurs making high six figures, seven figures, sometimes eight figures from what they're doing, and in different modalities. So we have a chapter about how do you make a lot of money in podcasting? How do you make a lot of money from blogging? How do you make a lot of money from online courses, etc.? And so I interviewed them, profiled them, and at the same time, as I was writing this book, I started practicing and applying what I was learning, so that I could add some fuel to the fire of my own revenue. And so, literally, from in the 1 year that I was writing it, from 2015 to 2016, I was able to increase my income just shy of $300,000 that year,
Heck
by
yeah.
simply by applying the principles in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so I don't know about you, But sometimes I don't feel like I really run a business. I'm not cheating. This is like a cheat code. Like I sit in my house talking to a $70 microphone and thousands of people hear this. Like this is not real, you know? And I get a lot of that from my friends who are still working, normal jobs, regular jobs if you will, which I don't look down on because, we need that in society. Not everyone could be me. We or you, society would literally crumble because I don't know how to do anything anymore, right? But I think it's so incredible to me that you and I can sit here. We met once in New York at a networking party. Ran into Seth Godin there. Ramit was there. Like Todd
Yeah,
Herman,
it was
who's become a good
the
friend.
cookie
Yeah, the
party.
cookie
Yeah.
thing with Saul, and my friend Trevinia got me connected there. And I'm like, I've met all these people through the internet. This is so weird, and I can reach people through the internet and online and monetize it. And sometimes I feel like, is this real? Is this going to last? Is this going to last? So now it's very normal to have a podcast. YouTube is very normal, right? It's almost par for the course, these things, having a website, blogging, all that content creation, like you said. Where do you see this space going in order to stay ahead of the game, ahead of the curve, as the workforce enters, more of them enter into this space? What would you say to those who have been doing this for a while that you think we need to do to continually stay ahead?
Well, I think that the main thing that I would say, Mike, is that there are a lot of people, I think certainly sometimes in the early stages of their business, but I think to a certain extent, some people have built their business on models that I will argue are not necessarily sustainable, in the sense that for people who build their online business through paid advertising, like, oh, I want to build a seven-figure business, which means I'm going to spend $900,000 on $950,000 on Facebook ads so that I can earn $1 million. And then, like, okay, fantastic, you're actually earning probably less than you did at your job, but oh, it's a seven-figure business. I think a problem that we have often is everybody talks about the gross, nobody talks about the net.
Mm-hmm.
For me, the biggest lesson of entrepreneurship is like, it's not what you're bringing in. Hello, it's what you keep. It is what are your margins. And entrepreneurship, if you do it right, enables you to have an incredibly high margin business and an incredibly sustainable business. But it is not sustainable to be buying likes. Facebook can do whatever it wants. It can raise the rates. It can ban you from the platform for any number of infractions, large or small. I think the people who have built a business on things like that, it is not terribly sustainable. I am much more, I mean, I experiment a little bit. I actually just started this year with online advertising, but I have been in business for 14 years. And I'm a big fan of relying, if not solely, certainly primarily on organic growth and organic engagement. Because if you have the sort of proverbial 1,000 true fans, or 10,000 or 100,000, who knows, true fans, when you start out, maybe it's 10 true fans, whatever it is, but those are the people who are going to keep you in business. And it could be B2B, it could be B2C. I mean, you can have a handsome business as a consultant if you have 10 really great B2B clients that they keep hiring you for things because they love you and they think, oh my God, Mike Kim is the best. That is awesome. I think that if we become sort of prey to an arms race of wanting to look bigger than we are and somehow paying for that so that we can skip the line, I find that to be very unsustainable. But if you have built a kind of brand where people know your name and respect you over the long term, I think that's actually quite sustainable no matter how crowded the market becomes.
I love that. I think honestly, in probably 5 years of business, I've spent less than $10,000 on paid ads.
Yeah.
Just, and door after door has opened for me. And the currency that I really chose to engage in, and I'm not trying to be too like woo woo here, but the currency I really tried to engage in was either influence or relationships. That was it. I look back on every big opportunity I had, and the clients that I had, many of whom you and I would both know. And it was unconscionable to me when I was reading Reinventing You in 2013 at that bookstore that, oh yeah, dude, in like 6 years you'll be fine. In 6 years, that business author John Maxwell, they're going to hire you. Donald Miller is going to hire you. I'd be like, I don't know. But it was relationships and influence that got me there. And I think the willingness to truly help people. I love what you do because you're creating content, you're teaching people, and I never have felt that you were one of these people from like standing on top, a sage on top of an ivory tower, broadcasting to people. And there are folks who just they want to do that, and they don't want to coach people. They don't want to get kind of out in the dirt, down in the dirt with them. They want to help them. As you look forward, like into the next year, 2 years of your business, what is really exciting you? You've written all the great books, Dorie. You've done it all. You're speaking at all the big schools. You're what excites you now? Like, what are you looking forward to?
Yeah, well, thank you, Mike. I would say, in the short term, at least, in the short term, it's all about the long term, because I'm actually writing a book this summer. That's my kind of summer project, at least the first draft of the book. And it is a book of all things about long-term thinking. That is my next project. It's going to be coming out probably fall 2021 from Harvard Business Review Press. So that is what I am diving into. And I figure, everybody's a little miserable as we get into month 4 of COVID and still not being able to do all of the things that people would want to do. And so I figured that working on my book and being able to sublimate my inability to have dinner parties and things like that into writing a good book seemed like the best move.
That's smart. Okay, I've got to ask you one final selfish question because I've been trying to write this book. Okay, and everybody in my tribe knows I've been trying to write this book for like 4 years. Okay, and so I told myself this story because I went through some really tough personal times in personal life. I went through a divorce and blah blah blah. But I had this book deal lined up in 2016. And I didn't write the book. Now it's 4 years later. It's a little ridiculous. The excuse is getting a little old for me. Okay. So I got to ask yourself a question. How you mentioned earlier in our talk that you learned how to create content quickly. Dorie, how are you pumping out these books? Tell me. I don't care if you hire a writer. If you're like, dude, just hire a writer, I will go do that. What are you doing? What is your secret? Tell me, please. Help me.
Well, it's funny. I actually have an online course about this. I'll comp you into it, Mike. I'll hook you up.
Okay.
The Rapid Content Creation Masterclass. So I have thought about these questions a lot. I think that the short answer is, obviously, your answer sort of implies this, right? It's not that it takes 4 years to write a book. It's that you have been busy mentally with other things. If you actually sit down to write a book, I have people that I've worked with that they can write a blog, no problem, right? You blindfold them in an hour or two, they can write a blog. They're fine with that. It's not that, they're not a good writer or they don't know how to write. It's that a book means something emotionally to them. And it feels like it has to be, like you have to write the Bible or something. Like, it's not important enough.
Yes.
It's not good enough. And I think that that's how we get ourselves tripped up. And so one of the gifts of having started my career as a journalist is like, you just let go of all the preciousness. It's like, it's not like, oh, is it perfect? Is it the best thing? It's like, you know what? Is it good enough? Yes. Okay, great. Is it libelous? No. Okay, fantastic. Where we go?
Lower that bar. Make it super. Okay, I will take that to heart because you're reading me like a book. I have felt that way. I can crank out posts, social, blog posts, lead magnets, you name it, in my sleep.
Yes.
And I'm just like, I compiled it at least. I know I've got 45,000 words on my Scrivener doc. The book is there.
Yes.
I'm just rewriting it 18 times. So, okay. All right. I will pledge to you, I will get this done. But yo, remember, I will be like, this dude started out in Barnes and Noble reading my book. Now he's actually got a book, and I'll be like the biggest Dorie Clark champion. There we go.
I'm cheering
Oh,
you on, my man.
all
I
right.
love it.
Oh, Dorie, thank you so much for joining us today. Everybody who's listening, pick up a copy of Entrepreneurial You. Also, pick up a copy of Reinventing You if you find yourself where I was years ago.
If you want to
Really,
be the next Mike Kim.
there you go. I'm not exaggerating. That book was the only thing I could find in that entire store that spoke to me where I was. And I felt so seen and understood. And that's coming from like an INTJ type 8 on the Enneagram. I don't have feelings, you know?
I'm an INTJ too, brother. So I'm writing it for you.
There we go. Thank you so much for joining us today. Everybody pick up a copy of that book. Dorie, thanks so much. This was awesome.
Mike, thank you. Great to be here.